Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any grand law statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, we love seeing you live every Thursday night in Facebook and YouTube land. So the chats are always fun. We can't get to all the comments, but your comments may show up on the show, so check yourself. And as always, if you can't catch us live, check the replay or listen to us in your favorite podcasting app. You know me, as always, John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. Next up for his introduction, past master Joe Martinez. How's it going?
Hello. It still rings new to my ear. Yes. Joe Martinez.
We can fix that if you need to.
Well, yeah, you can't all be like RJ and take 7-year breaks and stuff. And then get back in the saddle. Yeah, Joe Martinez, past master Manassas Lodge, number 182 in Manassas, Virginia, member of many other things. And as always, damn glad to be here.
Nice. Awesome. And last but not least for tonight, Robert Johnson, Worcester Master of Wait, hold on. Something's different. Did you get a haircut?
I got them all cut, and I'm also down here in in Joe's office,
Nice.
which we're there's some spring cleaning going on.
Remodeling.
Nice.
Mhm. Yeah, down here for, of course, Masonic Week at the Allied Masonic Degrees. Going to make an appearance tomorrow with my official duties, and Saturday, of course. And hopefully we'll be able to catch some of y'all out there. We can share a Coke, a coffee, or a cocktail later. I don't know what's going to happen, but, I like to Facebook. So what happens in Crystal City, Virginia is not going to stay there, just so you know.
The pictures will be shared.
Unless you go to the Crystal City restaurant, then that will stay there. Yes.
Yeah, okay, sure.
We'll talk later.
Okay.
Lunch is great.
All right. Let's see. I want to give a special shout out to the patrons who continue to support the show. We are coming up on our 10th year, and we would not have made it half as far if it weren't for some of you folks here. So if you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable and buy RJ a Coke.
Or a cocktail. Or lunch at the Crystal City restaurant.
Yeah.
Nice.
Sure.
Yes.
Awesome. Now, we also have
around.
the best intro that you could possibly have for any special segment. What's it called? Joe, what's it called again?
It's called Dying a Fire.
Tarot card of the week.
That is so repellent.
I love it.
God.
It's got a real Saturday Night Live / Conan O'Brien vibe.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll be your Max Weinberg.
I need to throw some index cards at the camera or something. There's a reference.
Actually,
there.
You got to be Max Weinberg. I'm not a drummer. Jason is. I'll be the Jimmy Vivino.
Ooh.
Nice.
Yes. So this week, we're gonna split this up, right? Yes. So we picked a very special tarot deck for this week, and pulled it out of the archives. It is the one and only, I think one of RJ's favorites, because I won it in an auction. The Literary Tarot. Yes, the Literary Tarot, and this was like
Literary awesome.
Yes, it is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful deck. It is gold foil, the shiny crown. Just started looking through it tonight. These cards are absolutely beautiful. It was a Kickstarter, right, Robert?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they did a Kickstarter, and essentially all the proceeds went to charities that assist kids in getting to get into books and read. So the entire deck is really unique in that every single card is different. There's no you're not going to find too many common elements between cards. What you'll find are scenes, captivating scenes from your favorite literary works, yeah, I mean, just really incredible stuff. They outdid themselves. So
Yeah. So we got some special cards for tonight, I think.
yeah,
right?
we do.
Yeah, so hopefully the ones that we draw may or may not be related to the literary artist that we are talking about tonight, Oscar Wilde, brother Oscar Wilde.
Randomness.
Let's see if we can get some random cards drawn that may.
Well, how random can you get? Let's draw one, and we'll get the the Page of Quills.
Ooh. I'm getting definitely getting some Oscar Wilde vibes there.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
And then the other one we drew for this was the King of Parchment, which is an homage. You can see there the painting in the background to Dorian Gray.
Oh yeah, look at that! What a coincidence!
Yes.
Yeah.
What a coincidence that you would pick those two cards
Yeah.
out of the literary tarot deck.
It is.
The King of Parchment, obviously referring to the Portrait of Dorian Gray, one of his classical works. And what's the other one for the Page of Quills?
The Importance of Being Earnest, I believe it is.
Yes, which I believe was to be his magnum opus as well.
Well, that was a play. So that wasn't. Yeah. So that was a play. So he was. We'll talk about him. He was a playwright and a writer. But yes, I mean his one book work was The Picture of Dorian Gray. So.
Yeah, and speaking of the importance of being earnest, there's a great film project happening right now, capturing the life and times of Jim Varney.
No way.
Ernest B. Worrell, called The Importance of Being Earnest, which just went into post-production, by the way. I'm very excited about that.
That is amazing. My kids are going to love that.
Yeah, y'all love it. Jim Varney, top notch.
Yes, indeed. Well, there you go. What a coincidence. So we have those two. So good call for drawing those tonight. Let's talk about Oscar Wilde. All right. So we thought we'd take a little break from the norm and talk about a historical figure, right? Famous Freemasons have been covered left, right, up, and down, right? They are easy subjects to go into. But we thought, hey, let's mix it up and let's talk about something we haven't talked in a while. And then, what better place to start than with someone with a huge persona around him and controversy as well. So, we're not gonna hold anything back. We're gonna talk about the life and times of this complicated yet eccentric brother, and get down to his Masonic history, what influence the craft had on him, if any, and what he did with his life and times. So, from a little bit of a history thing, the best source material that I've found is, you guys ever remember reading articles from like Petri Stones, the review of Freemasonry? It's freemasonsfreemasonry.com.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great
that's
website, great resource.
Yeah, it really is. So, this is most of the information we'll talk about tonight is covered from a paper by worshipful brother Yasha Barasiner, and he did a great job going to source materials to go get dates of initiation as well as a lot of his appendant degrees as well. So, let's talk about Oscar Wilde. So, just to kind of kick things off. Born in Ireland, died in Paris, died in France, and he had a very long Irish name, Oscar Finnegal O'Flaherty Willis Wilde, which he dropped all of his middle names by 1877. He was born in 16th of October, 1854. Okay, but then died right at the turn of the century, in November of 1900. So he only lived to be about 46 years old, if the math serves right. But had a wild ride when he did there. And one thing that was interesting for his early life was he was very academically inclined, like super big brain. So much, in fact, that he was admitted into Trinity College at the Dublin University, won a full scholarship, and really just was in college before he was even 20 years old. So he was from a family who actually had his father was also a Freemason. It's really hard to say how much of a Masonic influence, right, his early life had on that, but his father did do quite a bit of stuff at his Masonic lodge. Like his father was, I think, believe master of the lodge, served for quite some time. But it's really kind of a separate period of history. At least there really weren't like brothers hanging out at lodge all the time. Like you kind of see that today with men and their Lewises.
Well,
Robert?
I think it's much more along the lines of sort of the upper crust social acceptance, even around the idea you mentioned academia. He's a member of was it Apollo University Lodge, and he gets initiated early on in 1875. So he's like what, 21 years old, maybe.
Not even.
Yeah.
No.
So that's the first fun fact.
He pulled the George Washington.
He did. So, can I pull that thread for a second? Because I thought that was fun. Because not unlike George Washington, who I'll say on the record was an irregular and clandestine Freemason, according to the terms that we use today. While not clandestine, because Apollo Lodge was well established in England at the time, he was irregular by all means, and that is because that Apollo University Lodge actually had a rolling dispensation to initiate members earlier than 21 years old. Why? Because they were a university lodge, right? So not unlike the Patriot Lodge, right? While we still stick to 18 years old and older here in Virginia, at the time, you really had to be 21 years old or older. And so there was kind of this once a year, twice a year dispensation that Apollo University Lodge got to say, hey, can you just give us a blanket statement so when we get freshmen coming in, we can hit them from the ground floor and bring these guys in.
That's the way to go.
Don't rush me. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting too to note not only his joining early. This has everything to do with, I think, in that time period, the alignment of his own personal values. Number one, like you said, his dad was a Mason. He had many close friends that were Masons. But also, he's kind of like a breakthrough class type person in that he's not by any means low class, but he has this thin glass ceiling to break in order to be somebody who could hang out with, big deal royals and these and kind of intermixing with these sorts of folks. And so he's got a motivation to do so there. And it's just, thinking about his inclinations, for instance, very theatrical, a writer, an eccentric, loves to be dressed in the finest things, very engaged in his own appearance. I think Brother Patrick Day did a great expose on this. And he talked about, the nomenclature of the day was, they called him a dandy, somebody who was very, very concerned with their appearance and whatnot.
I can relate to that a lot. Like, I feel that inside my soul.
You connect to that. I see. I do believe that. It's so much, in fact, that I think, as an aside, he really was enthralled with the asceticism movement, right? Where he really cared about art for art's sake. He, even when I think after graduating, still called himself a professor of the aesthetics. So because he was so caught up in the poetry and the art and the dress that that was part of his persona, right? That was what he was all about. And so there was a movement that was happening at that same time of people that were trying to counterculture, right? The Enlightenment period, right? Right. So this is a little bit post Enlightenment, obviously, but you still had in England, the upper crust, upper class, right? And so he's trying to be the counter movement, the punk movement to go along with that, to say, hey, we don't need to necessarily hang out with the Royal Society to be cool. We can appreciate art just because we want to appreciate art. We don't have to have some sort of utilitarian reason for doing so.
So was he like the first emo?
I like that.
Right?
That makes sense.
You mentioned the idea of an eccentric and of like kind of a punk avant-garde. And the idea is that in these times, it's an interesting time, in this kind of Victorian era, because what you have are, there are things that were commonplace happening in that day and age that today, we'll just say the very conservative, religious movements in America today have almost they wouldn't be able to survive in that era of history because the things that perhaps were considered sins and things today were things that were just happening in everyday occurrences then. It's almost been like kind of invented in the last 100 years or so. And so this era that he's living in is incredible in things of nature, like flamboyancy and then theatrics and art for art's sake, as you point out. He's somebody who's into liberation of many different things, and as such, he eventually kind of gets caught up in that and is forever known that way, but. It is definitely kind of like this punk rock scene for him, if you wanted to think about it that way.
Yeah, not to beat on this because there's so many other fun things we could talk about Oscar Wilde about, but it is kind of a polar opposite to the culture today, right? Like then the upper crust, they were the ones who pursued their passions and were a bit frivolous with their proclivities, shall we say. I'm trying to use big Victorian words here. But that's what you saw in Victorian Europe at the time. It was, hey, the rich people got to do the fancy stuff and they did it behind closed doors. And it was very, I guess in the modern, it's very eyes wide shut, right? That's the kind of vibe you got. And that was the status quo for the ultra high wealthy and popular and prestigious and people in high society, that kind of thing. So he was basically the punk counterculture, exactly as John said, to that. And it's kind of evident in some of his writings, right?
Which is wild because I gotta stop. This is like becoming punny at this point.
It's wild,
It's wild. It is interesting that we've taken the best parts of Oscar Wilde, perhaps his authored works, even up to a point, his, as Joe said, his proclivities, and celebrated them. So what's interesting is, this guy is larger than life, is much more well known and larger than life, say, in our era. We have movies that were made about him, celebrated. Granted, they took some liberties with his character and things, but it's just a fascinating character, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Indeed. So we know that he gets initiated into Freemasonry pretty much during his freshman year at college. Right? So, spoiler alert, he's really only active while he's at college. He is fascinated with Freemasonry. He's around Masons. He's really enthralled by the mystery of it all. He's hanging out with a couple of guys who are very active, and obviously, asks them to join. And so there's a funny little anecdote that comes out of this paper, which is interesting. Let me see if I can get my my quote here, because he gets initiated on. He gets initiated by special dispensation on Tuesday, the 23rd of February, 1875. Right? So he's not quite 21 yet. And when he's there, there's a lot of stuff that was going on that night. In fact, the evening began early at 4:45 p.m. with a third degree ceremony in which one guy was raised, then a pass to the second degree of another guy who later became a member of parliament, and then they called down to obviously the first degree, where Reverend H.A. Pickard of Christ Church College was the master of the lodge. So yeah, they're doing 3 separate ceremonies that day. Very long day if you've ever done that in your lodge.
Any one-day classes? How many of
Was
those?
it one-day class? No.
No.
Yeah, well, he didn't get. He definitely didn't do that, right? He did the whole 1 month, second degree, or
Right.
initiated, waited a month, second degree, then 2 months got his third degree. Sometime it was around May or something, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's a funny quote though that of course they did it right. They had a big, festive board after each lodge meeting. So on the night after his initiation, they had a big feast, in which Oscar got to give a little toast or something, and he said, "Hey, by the way, looking at these columns that have J and B on it, those brothers of John the Baptist, that's really great guy for the order, because you got his initials right there on the columns, and I've heard that St. John the Baptist was the founder of this order, and I hope we shall emulate his life, but not his death, because we ought to keep our heads." And it was said that his comments and wit were responded to with yells of laughter. And so either he was in full theatrics that night, or maybe some of the Masons in the room thought differently of what those columns meant.
Or maybe someone was sleeping during the lectures of the 3 different degrees that night. So
yells of laughter.
Yes.
So I gotta ask. 'Cause we're talking about this, and we see. I even have reposted things online. Quote from Oscar Wilde, and it's brother Oscar Wilde, and and we're so into celebrating this guy, but as you alluded to, really only active for those 4 years, and
but he was a Mason though.
Yeah, and then he gets expelled.
What? No.
Yeah, twice.
No, couldn't have happened.
No.
So, right, and granted, okay, so today we have suspension for non-payment of dues. But in his day and age, they talk about that he was expelled from Apollo University Lodge in 1878 for non-payment of dues. And then in 1883, Churchill Lodge also suspended him from expelled him from the fraternity for non-payment of dues.
Right.
And they specifically note in their notes on this expulsion that they had attempted not less than 3 times to acquire his debts. I mean, this guy is somebody who embodies the idea of a starving artist,
Yes.
likely somebody who
Mhm.
relied on benefactors,
Mhm.
was frequently called into university court for failure to pay debts. The guy was, what do we call it today? He likes champagne, but he's got a beer budget.
Yeah.
Mm.
Champagne taste on a beer budget.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, and spoiler alert, he runs into a lot of debt later in life and almost dies penniless. So yeah, he's definitely has a rough take on life, because of not because of his lifestyle, but just because of circumstance.
Well, it was because of his lifestyle eventually.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, he definitely did like to enjoy himself in his proclivities.
we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
More times. So yeah,
So,
so he Mason for a whopping 4 years.
Basically, he
Correct.
did join Scottish Rite, and we do have evidence of him also becoming a Mark Master as well in those 4 years. So at least he went on to some of the other degrees. He made a mark. I haven't seen it yet, but I would love to see what mark he had made. Apparently, it's some sort of combination of his initials.
Yeah, it says that he got the Scottish Rite at Oxford University chapter of Rose Croix number 40 on November 27th, 1876. So I don't know if you guys have ever been, at your valleys in the Scottish Rite, and maybe you have seen brothers from across the pond come over here. Many times they excuse themselves as to not see anything beyond the 18th degree because on a technicality, that is what they are allowed to see up to only. In essence, he achieved his capstone of Scottish Rite Masonry as well.
Well, and the mark there was its own thing, just like in England, right? So it was,
separate grand jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah, and this is
a pendant body jurisdiction.
This is just a year. I mean, he gets Rose Croix a year after he's raised, basically. So
that's about right.
It's yeah. Well, at least he didn't. Maybe he didn't get the petition the night of, perhaps. So that's a good sign.
So he so you say he basically gets suspended or expelled for non-payment of dues by early 1780s, and that's about the same time that he actually meets his wife, where he meets her early 1880s, and gets married, and actually ends up having 2 sons through her, both let's see, Cyril and Vivian. And but by the time that he's had the second son, he's already starting to lose interest in his wife. This is only after like 2 years. So he gets married in about 1883, has his first son in 1885, second son in 1886. So do the math, by about 3 years, he's losing interest in his marriage and actually gets himself into a little bit of extracurricular trouble as well.
Yeah. So like right around 1886. So starting in 1886, you find out that he begins relationships with a number of young men, one of which he has a love affair with Lord Alfred Douglas. Lord Alfred Douglas at the time is only 21 years old, and Wilde is 37. But that's not really what got him in trouble. I mean, like a lot of these relationships, again, in Victorian England, is like no big deal. The crime is, of course, I guess you would call the crime that they saw was because it was out in the open. It wasn't being discreet. Discretion is the word I'm looking for here. He was, he of course tried to be discreet, but it didn't really work out. And Lord Douglas is is the person who introduces Oscar Wilde to something that's known as England's underground prostitution scene. And in particular, you've got a number of young youths, men and girls, who are trying to escape their class. And the only way they know how to do that is through prostitution. And so it becomes a booming business. And Oscar Wilde frequented these underground sexual scenes often. His courtiers were usually between the ages of 13 and 16 years old, and he's 37.
Whoa.
So we've got massive age gaps, huge problems in discretion of. These are criminal activities, not only on the surface level of where you could be arrested for, in those days, just what they would call homosexual activity or what they would call sexual indecency, but they took it a point further when they figure out that this is involving kids. So he's really accosted on two main problems, right? The first is that one is underage, and two, believe it or not, it's also held against Oscar because he is having relations with somebody who is below his social class. So this is another thing. And the kid that he was having relationships with, his name is Alfred Taylor. And Alfred Taylor, at the time of the apprehension of both of these two gents, Alfred was 13, meaning that he was tried as an adult, and both of them got 2 years hard labor. In fact, Alfred ended up serving much more time, I think, than Oscar Wilde did, because he had some other things on there, that dealt with all of the lewd charges that might go along with this. So, one begs the question of, we love to celebrate a brother, Oscar Wilde. Patrick Day asked the question, would we still consider somebody who'd been expelled a brother? And we said, well, it's non-payment of dues. But then it's like, well, yeah, but then...
Yeah, where does once a brother, always a brother? Where does that line get drawn? Wow, the MP out versus, hey, he went to jail for some lewd stuff back in the day.
So I would say, like, if he hadn't have been expelled for NPD, he certainly would have been expelled later for sexual misconduct with a minor. So it is interesting that we celebrate it. We'll call it a curiosity at best.
Yeah.
But this leads to a whole slew of things later on in his life. Libel.
Yeah, that's a turning point. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
His works become very judged. People start beginning to look at his works in a different light, and perhaps, by rightfully so. Today we look at things like the Dorian Gray. We look at that as almost a like a fictional biographical tale.
Right. Yeah, it definitely had the undertones in there.
Huge thread to pull on that. Well, to your point, his most successful works all really come around this time where he's about to go to jail for things. You know what I mean? So it's all happening at the same time, right? Like his most famous picture, Dorian Gray, was, I think, 1890, right? And Importance of Being Earnest was, 1895? So that was about a year before he went to jail. Mm-hmm. And I was reading somewhere it was one of the first celebrity trials, right? So, we had our OJs and our Johnny Depps, and, they had Oscar Wilde. It was making all the rage in the newspapers.
It's funny because there's a really good quote that Worshipful Brother Yasha Berenser starts off his paper with. It says, this is from Oscar Wilde. I want to get to the point where I shall be able to say quite simply and without affectation that the two great turning points in my life were when my father sent me to Oxford and when society sent me to prison. Right? That sums it up. That sums up the whole episode here.
It is. It is, and I think there's been some really great commentary. I think you're going on in the chat. They say, "Well, is prostitution philosophically immoral?" I don't. I mean, personally, as a libertarian, sort of leaning person, I would tend to say that your body is your body. You do what you want to do.
World's oldest profession.
It is the world's oldest profession. That's right. And is the prostitution what made him, the crime? No, the crime is essentially, of course, in that day and age, that's the crime, which is still a crime today. I think what you can judge it on is not the prostitution, but the fact that he is sleeping on the regular and buying lavish gifts and things like that for, little kids.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like you screw around, eventually you're going to get found out. And so he actually messed with the wrong person, which was actually the son of the Marquis of Queensberry, who was actually he started having a love affair with I believe it was Lord Alfred Douglas. And what was interesting was that this is what started the trial, that on 18th of February 1895, the Marquess of Queensberry left his calling card at Wilde's club, and we'll show a picture of that here because it was actually Exhibit A in the trial, which is fascinating.
Can you say Marquis again? I want to hear you say that.
Well, so it's Marquess or Marquis of Queensberry. And it wrote like the big, scarlet letter in the corner, and wrote, "For Oscar Wilde, posing sodomite." And just threw this card on the table and walked out. And so basically flat out calling Oscar Wilde a sodomite in public at a public club. And so,
and a letter on that. That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, just there it is. Like, there's no doubt about what he's being called. So Oscar Wilde says, "Well, wait a minute. Like, you have to prove this. Like, I'm going to actually take him to court for libel because it was written down. Now I can actually say that you're trying to offend my name by libel, and so I'm gonna take you to court." So not only
this is where you're going, Johnny.
This is crazy, right?
Crazy part. Yeah.
Okay, so he's like, easy. I'm going to win this, no problem. I'm going to clear my name. It'll all be good. Until the Marquis actually brings receipts. So he starts hiring private investigators and starts bringing evidence to the trial of Oscar Wilde's promiscuous things. Yes.
Question, Dr. Rourke. So in Victorian England, UK, you got receipts from prostitutes?
No. I'm just saying.
Okay. I'm like,
it's the young slang.
I want to do his taxes.
Carry the one.
These are not deductible, bro.
It's a business expense.
This all goes down 10 years after he's been expelled as well.
Yes.
And had he kind of taken his... That's poor. Okay. I don't really have another. Okay. Just disregard the entire context of this. But had he just taken his licks and been okay with this card being thrown and not gone after that libel suit, I think. Could
have been completely different.
Totally different outcome. Would not have died perhaps penniless. Could have chalked it up to the life and times.
Yeah. So what's fascinating is all this evidence starts getting brought to court, and he quickly retracts. He's like, "Holy crap! Like, I'm going to lose this case." Loses the case. So not only did it completely backfire, he has to pay court costs, which totally bankrupts him at that point, and he has the pleasure of going to jail for 2 years. So and now is publicly denounced as a sodomite. So
yeah, I was like, look, if everybody wants to see where he got to stay for 2 years, I have a picture. And here it is. Where'd it go? There it is. That was his room.
oh wow.
Yeah. Really fancy.
That's not what is. I mean, there are worse places.
There are. Yeah.
Um,
Not bad.
Not bad.
yeah.
So he gets to spend 2 years in the slammer, and then as soon as he gets out, he's out of the London area. He goes straight to France, assumes a new name, and he's like, I just need to hit the reset button on this, and doesn't survive much longer after that. So.
Yeah, they say he gets like really, really sick. There's been a number of different what do you call it? Mythologies, talking about, what he could have had, whether it was something he contracted or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think they landed on something, but I can't remember what it was.
So I was reading, it looks like they decided he had meningitis.
Which also could have been syphilitic meningitis
Yes.
at the time, which I don't know where he would have got that.
Yeah, I mean,
Receipts, baby.
the receipts. Look at the receipts.
Let's go to Exhibit B.
You probably could have tested Alfred Taylor, and you might have found something similar.
Yeah. So he's released from prison 19 May 1897, dies in November of 1900. So only lives 3 years in France. So kind of and again, destitute at that point.
Yeah, and I want to say there was, I mean, aside from the one lawsuit, the where he went with libel, I mean, there were lots of other, and not lots, but I think there were a handful of other court cases that involved things around this as well that just all seemed to just pile on. And you can imagine in that day and age, I seem to recall reading something along the lines of like additional prison time added for the inability to pay your debts. So, I mean, he just lives an unfortunate sort of existence in that latter half of his life, and then the guy doesn't even make 50 years old.
No, well, I mean, to your point, I mean, they still had debtors' prisons going into the early 20th century. You know what I mean? So that was a thing. Like, oh, you can't pay this fine? You're going to jail for a year, for 20 pounds or, whatever. So that was a thing. But to your point, yeah, I mean, those last couple of years for him, I mean, I was reading somewhere where he even applied to go off to a Jesuit retreat, I think, after he got out of prison, just to, like John said, hit that reset button. And they told him, no, he couldn't. So,
Yeah, I don't think he would have lasted in the Jesuits. I mean, maybe if he would have went to Rome or something.
He did get last rites read to him, though.
He was baptized.
Yep.
Right before his death.
Just the old last minute presto changeo.
The old Constantine.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Just in case. So again, we're getting close to time, but just the point of the story is right. Like with most famous Freemasons, they are human beings. We're all flawed, some more than others. And, while we should separate, the man and his nature from the works, from Freemasonry, but we tend to just say famous Freemasons, let's go celebrate them. So we just want to make sure we're covering that this is a complicated subject, complicated man. And, and really point blank, in today's society, other than the underage stuff, like the homosexuality would not have really been as big of a deal. You're nevertheless being charged for sodomy.
He still would have got canceled, bro.
Oh, he would have got canceled, right? For other reasons.
Well, I mean, to that point, right? Like stepping outside the Freemasonry thing, he was not part of upper society. So at some point in time, they would have cut their losses with him. Like, he was a fun thing to have around. Ooh, cool. He's a playwright. He's a writer. He's really fancy.
Mhm.
But, you know, once the champagne runs out and they have no more use for him, he would not have survived in that society long term anyway, right? Because he would have not been the new fresh thing anymore, and they would have moved on to something else, right? So, and I think he probably struggled with that and lived with that. I mean, it's evident in his writings. Like, the picture of Dorian Gray is, like you said, John, it is literally a window into how this man viewed his own life, right? Of vanity and pleasure and the struggles with it and what's really underneath that. I mean, if y'all have not read The Picture of Dorian Gray, boom, go read it. Or read the Cliff Notes if they still make those things.
They don't make those.
Is that
but,
like
you
a
know,
Wikipedia summary? Is that what that is?
Yeah, exactly.
Barnes and Noble's always got like really nice leather-bound classic editions of those. They're Dorian Gray. You would think it sounds like some crazy Oscar Wilde, and you think, oh man, it's got to be some huge tome. It's not really big. It's not a huge book. But exactly like you said, thinking about when you said the champagne runs out, I thought that was really interesting in a wonderful way to put that too, because he's kind of like this sort of curiosity to the upper crust. He is aesthetic to sort of have around. Oh yeah, we've got Dorian Gray, and when it all comes down to it, like maybe behind closed doors, you could almost imagine an argument that takes place between some upper crust person who had him over at a fancy party, and they say, "You're nothing without me, buddy." Think Bob Crane a la John Carpenter. So
Nice. Very nice. All right. So that's Oscar Wilde in a summary. Let's head around to final thoughts, and we'll just go straight to it. No final question of the week. I'll just give your final 2 cents on the life and times of Oscar Wilde, let's start with Robert.
I think Oscar Wilde was indeed a brilliant author. I find that his sort of legendary quick wit and things of that nature are missed in today's society. You don't find too many people that have the ability to make people laugh in an intelligent way, regardless of the way they do it, in terms of like, are they using super high highfalutin words, or are they using base language that 99% of the population understands. I think he was just a great writer. I find it an unfortunate existence in that he gave in to his lower instincts and probably a good amount of peer pressure. And to an extent, you have to say that we are, at least in some measure, a product of our environments. You can look at abuse cases today and see that that's true. You can also think about the types of things that were shunned and not looked great upon in that era, and the things that when you tend to sort of criminalize or ostracize things that in general are, for all intents and purposes, basic and natural developments within the human and the human psyche, that you're turning criminals into just people, and then you end up driving them into dangerous situations for them to fulfill their human desires. And he gets caught up in this, and again, just unfortunate. I think that it's cool to call him a bro. I don't know that I would actually celebrate him as any more than I might celebrate somebody else who was expelled from the fraternity. But again, celebrated as a good writer, sure. And I hope everybody tunes in next week when we talk about John Wayne and his one-day class, a 1970s article that appeared in Playboy magazine in which he said some incredibly insensitive things.
It's true. Look it up. It's all true.
That's all.
Joseph?
Yes. Sorry, I was busy. I was trying to schedule a John Wayne movie marathon at our pod for next month to celebrate Masons in the public eye. But no, yeah, it's Oscar Wilde's story is really an interesting one. And again, this is not a book podcast, but if you really want a first person insight into how this man really thought about himself, living in a time of hedonism and decadence, and like John said, being so enamored with the aesthetics of life, and knowing that it's going to set you up for failure. Read The Picture of Dorian Gray, man. It is, it really is a tragic story. And when you think about it, knowing what you know now that, he's really writing about himself, right? As he's living through this period in time, there's a tragedy to that. And it's kind of beautiful, right? There's a tragedy to acknowledging your own human existence. And I think he captures that absolutely wonderfully. It's an absolutely wonderful tale. So definitely, if you haven't read it, if you weren't forced to read it in high school like I did, definitely read it. But yeah, to Robert's point, yeah, we love to celebrate our famous Freemasons. But as John said, we do have to remember that Freemasons are a microcosm of the macrocosm of human society. So you get people of all shapes, size, colors, and for the bingo card, proclivities. So, there's all types of people out there. So, I'm content in celebrating his writing accomplishments. Probably wouldn't bring him to lodge, and in Virginia, he wouldn't be allowed in anyway because he was a felon. So, yeah. So kudos.
Oh, yeah.
Oscar Wilde. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I first got turned on to Oscar Wilde through his quotes because he has some really zippy one-liners. So here's just a few of them, and I'll save my favorite one for last. That, let's see, everything in moderation, including moderation. I can, and this one's appropriate for today's episode, I can resist everything except temptation. Which that is a true statement of his life and times. True friends will stab you in the front. And my personal favorite is experience is merely the name men give to their mistakes. Because, we say, oh, I've got 20 years experience in this career field. Oh, okay. So you've failed for 20 years and you have those stories to tell about that, right? So I always find that fascinating that we carry experience as a badge, but if you think of it in that quote, that experience is merely men, the name men give to their mistakes, then it certainly paints a different picture. So, yes, like all things, separate the man from the Mason from everything else that goes with it, and you'll certainly be better off, right? No hero worship, because as they say, never meet your heroes. But it is worth talking about, it is worth discussing for historical purposes, and that's why we study history. And if Jason were here, he'd say, that's the whole historical element, that you have to take the good with the bad, learn from it, and try to not repeat those mistakes in history. So with that, I want to thank you all very much for watching. See you next week, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.